Professor Sung Choi and researcher Aaron Hanai have been working together on autonomous underwater vehicles at the School of Engineering at UH Manoa for some years, and they have made phenomenal advances in that technology. We are therefore fortunate to have them with us in the studio today to discuss their work. Sung Choi and Aaron Hanai, yeah? You guys, you're both from University of Hawaii in Manoa, and you're both working on water stuff at the School of Engineering. And that's very exciting because we don't get to meet you guys. We got to get you out of there more, you know. You can hang around at Manoa. We've got to get you downtown, you know. Anyway, you're working on some pretty newsy stuff. You've been working on this a long time, but it sounds like you're hitting, some progress now that is really worth talking about. So, Sung Choi, you design, you do scientific work around autonomous underwater vehicles. What is that, and what are you doing now?
Okay. Underwater vehicles can be divided into like three categories. Number one is something that everybody's very familiar with, and that's manned submersibles, submarines. Anywhere from a military one that takes several hundred people to a one or two person one that'll go down to the Marianas Trench, or the ones you've seen on Titanic or all these TV shows. The second one is what they call a remotely operated vehicle, or an ROV. And these are very popular because they are actually controlled by a human being on the surface like a video game. And you see it all over the place. You have high school and middle school and elementary school competitions like the Big Island ROV Regional, Hawaii Underwater ROV competition that's here in Oahu. And then, of course, they have an international one called the Mate International, which was also held in Hilo this year.
Can you buy them in Walmart?
Pretty close. You can actually buy kits. They
right?
have kits that are available that you can put together using PVC pipes. We've actually done a lot of workshops at the university for many of the younger kids. If you really wanted to be inexpensive, we can take a soda bottle or a soda plastic bottle, put stuff in there, little tether coming out, and have it control, and that would be an underwater robot, remotely operated control, of course. What we're looking at is a phase that's above that, and that is the autonomous underwater vehicles. And these are basically underwater vehicles that do everything on its own. So, if you see cyborgs and all these robots that are working on in the movies, this is a vehicle that has the same type of thinking capability.
Are you available to consult with the movies? Because I think there's a lot of stuff coming up that they want to cover this kind of material.
Well, hey, give us a call. We'll be more than happy to help you guys
You
out.
heard it here on ThinkTech Hawaii.
There you go.
You too, Aaron, right?
In fact, one of the ones we did help at one time was the Bishop Museum when they set up their new exhibit for the underwater water stuff, and they had ROVs going in there. Of course, we told them to make sure that they cage the robots so they don't get broken by the kids, but, you know.
So tell me about your laboratory. Where is it? What does it look like? What kind of equipment does it have? What does it do?
We have two labs. We have one laboratory that's at the university, and what we do at the university is very theoretical, what they call controls and dynamics types of research that requires a lot of math, physics, algorithming, simulations, and we take that and we take it to our other lab / a spin-off company that we have on the Snug Harbor side, and we actually incorporate it directly into the vehicle that we have as a prototype, and we put it in the water and we run experiments to make
Where's
sure.
the Snug Harbor lab?
At Kehi Lagoon.
Ah, okay.
So Sand Island Access Road.
So, Aaron, is it true that you sleep in the lab? That's your regular place of abode?
Practically.
Or is it that you're sleeping inside the underwater vehicle? Which one?
Actually, that's a difference with the AUVs. You don't need the person operating it inside, right? So,
Okay.
Oh.
You mean there's no persons, inside the AUV?
Not yet. But, practically living in it is not a bad term because even though the vehicle runs on its own, presently, because it is very prototypical tests and we have to keep an eye on this so many $1 million machine, we actually have a monitoring station right by the pier. And I believe he was even there last night until 11 o'clock or so. So,
Stay off the streets, huh?
hey, there you go. It's actually safer, I think, right? but a lot of our nighttime experiments actually have a very good reason and a purpose for what we do. Is that there's no light when you go beyond 150, 200 feet anyway. So when it's dark outside, even if we test on a shallow basis, it has a very similar type of effect. It's underwater, it's salt water, which materials and electricity doesn't like. It's dark. It's high pressures. People compare underwater vehicles to space vehicles. Remember, we live in a 1 atmosphere environment. Go up to space, it's 0. Mathematically, that's a difference of 1. You go 6,000 meters deep, which is considered full ocean depth. That's what, 600 atmospheres? So we're talking mathematically a very different environment.
So they're made out of steel to handle all those atmospheres?
Steel?
Yeah.
What
Nowadays,
are they made out of?
Most of our vehicles aluminum.
Okay.
If you really want to go really deep, then you got to switch to titanium. So so you get the strength with less weight. And
So weight is bad. You don't want a lot of weight.
Yeah, right. Because then you use more power. And
Uh-huh.
for untethered vehicles in particular, you're running off of batteries. So you really want to conserve on your battery power.
What kind of battery? We talk about batteries in connection with energy, renewable energy all day long. So what kind of batteries are you using for
in
this?
the kind of first generation, we started with lead acid batteries, the old fashioned, and we stepped it up a little bit to the nickel metal hydrides. And maybe the next step further would be kind of the lithium type batteries, or there's experiments with fuel cells, things like that.
So you're always open for something new. You're always looking for the next step, the next advance in
Right,
science.
because the battery is kind of a component of the entire vehicle.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're open to kind of the other multidisciplinary kind of.
Well, I can get nearly a whole day on my iPhone. How long can you get on one of these batteries?
Depends. Depends on the
Maybe-
mission.
Yeah. So
Depends on
about
what it's doing. Yeah?
a
Yes.
day. So
Well, if you're in an area where there is very strong currents, that means you have to use the thrusters to compensate for that current, which means your battery life is going to be very heavily shortened. So it'd be like having an electric or a hybrid car, and you're constantly going uphill versus you're constantly going downhill.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going downhill maybe several thousand miles, who knows, right? But if you're going uphill, maybe 50 miles and you're out of juice.
So how big is the underwater vehicle? I imagine it as looking like a torpedo, but you have to correct me. What does it look like? How big is it? Would I know one if I stumbled across it in the dark?
In the dark. This one that we have as a prototype is fairly large. It's about the size of a suburban SUV.
Oh, that's big.
Yes, it is. And the two reasons why it is big is that it's the amount of power that we are using, so the batteries that take it up. And of course, when you have batteries, you have weight, and you have to compensate for the weight. So we have all this flotation or buoyancy aspect that take up the other half. So the vehicle weight is predominantly the frame plus the battery plus this buoyancy material. Rest of the other stuff is fairly light.
So out of the water, what does it weigh in pounds?
You want to take a guess?
Or kilos, if you like.
You want to take a guess?
Okay, I will. 2 tons.
That's about halfway there, huh?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's
So-
heavy. You got to
I
have
think-
hoists and lifts and all
Yeah.
kinds of equipment to move it around.
Yeah, I think your 2-ton guess is about the weight of our batteries.
Oh,
It's not quite 2 ton, but maybe a ton. And then of course the other flotation device is probably the other ton. And then the rest of the other stuff is all the electronics and the frame and all this stuff.
so you've been doing this for, it must be 15 years or so or more. I remember I met you. Dr. Cadman was there,
That's right.
and you were presenting in the Goodsill conference
right.
room. It was Meet the Scientist.
That's right.
It was all about
That was actually 9 years ago.
9 years ago. But you had
Because-
been doing it
yeah.
for a while then.
That was 9 years ago. I actually came back to Hawaii in 91. Aaron joined the lab 97, 98. something like that. So we actually come from a fairly diverse background. But at the same time, everybody in our lab has one goal, and we have specific skills that we're looking for. I come from a strict mechanical engineering background, bachelor's, master's, PhD. Aaron has a bachelor's in physics, a master's in mechanical engineering, and is doing his PhD in mechanical engineering. And of course, we have the other person that's in Italy, Dr. Giacomo Morani. He's an electrical engineering, computer science guy that also has some mechanical background. And our technician is an electronics technician who has very good machining skills. Everybody that has gone through our lab has three specific skills, and that is you need to know the mathematics because we need to understand what's there. You need to know the physics because we're interested in the theory. But the third one that a lot of people forget is that we want people to be able to couple all three together in the physical world. So Aaron, Giacomo, the other person is Kaikala, myself, we all do the theory, the math, as well as machine parts. So a lot of our knowledge is very in-house. We will think of something, we'll put it together, and then we'll go test it.
So that's kind of, it's a team thing, but the team is like fixated on this one creative area, and you get in there and you referred to it earlier, you live there.
Pretty much.
Your whole life is in there, and you're trying to find all the corners of it, which I would take a guess and say that is very satisfying. That gives you a lot of satisfaction in your work, no?
I think one difference about science and engineering is that engineering allows us to dream ideas and then put it in physical, and we can actually see what we created. And it also allows us to test and retest. And one of the things that I've been telling a lot of the younger kids in high school and junior high school is that engineering is one of the few disciplines that does not look down upon having mistakes or things going wrong. Because if we have an iPhone, every error you find creates a better iPhone for the next generation. That's what engineering is about. It's continuously making improvements and making whatever it is, make our working life, playing life, whatever, a lot easier and more fruitful.
So they say that in every engineer there's a scientist, and maybe in every scientist there's an engineer.
I don't know about that. I think in every engineer there is a scientist, but I don't know if there's in every engineer in a scientist. Okay, very different concept, I think. That's the thing. I mean, I wish we had more time, where maybe it's almost similar to the Greek philosopher idea that we had enough time that we can spend a third of our day just doing nothing more than dreaming about new ideas.
There's something very gratifying about that, Choi. So what about, let's go back to the SUV, if you will.
SUV, okay.
So how can you talk to that thing when it's down there? How do you communicate? Do you need wires? Can you go some wireless way, some radar way? I know radio waves aren't going to work. How do you actually communicate with the underwater vehicle?
As we were talking about before, the emphasis is on autonomy. 99% of this vehicle is autonomous.
So you don't?
We don't.
You shove it off and it does what it's supposed to do.
That's right.
This sounds like a lot of computer programming to me.
It is. So the other aspect of engineering, if you were to look at three aspects, is mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and computer science. And all three have to come into play to have a successful robot. And that's the type of background that we look at when we hire people for our lab or our spin-off company.
Well, it sounds like this is the kind of thing that happens these days. I mean, robotics goes beyond just your underwater vehicles, and you have to bring all those disciplines together. And if you don't do that, you're going to be missing something.
That's right.
You won't be able to realize, the achievement that you might otherwise realize. So when you program this thing, what language do you use? What kind of computer equipment do you use in order to tell it what to do and give it all those instructions?
And you want to talk about some details?
Yeah, we have to use a real-time OS, so kind of everything happens in the order you want it to happen. And I guess a lot of the programming, we want to kind of minimize what we need to communicate to the vehicle. It's because communication is minimal and it's very slow. And that's why we need to keep whatever is on the robot itself autonomous. So you just give it very like clean the kitchen, something like that, and it does its thing. In our case, it says go find an object, and it just goes, or pick something up. So that's what we communicate, and most of the program resides on the robot itself.
So it has a PC down there? Is it a PC or an Apple?
I guess kind of neither. So
Computing wise, we're not talking a computer. We have multiple computers down there, and it kind of relates to how our human bodies work. You know, we don't sit there and say, hey, open your eyes so we can see what's coming through our visual input. You know, you have a visual input that's constantly telling your brain all this stuff is coming through. Whenever you need something, you say, oh, I need this picture or whatever, right? Similar way, our underwater robot has many, many different sensors. Each sensor has its own little PC, and it's constantly running on its own. Whenever the main CPU needs something from one of the sensors, it'll ping that sensor and say, send me this data. And it utilizes that data at that point. But one difference is, we can't keep track of everything that goes on. I guess if we're hypnotized, you can go, recall all kinds of stuff. Well, this is a little bit easier. Because all the data is being recorded, we can actually go back and check everything that's on there and see what has been by its sensors, what has it seen, what did it miss. It's very complex, but at the same time, if we think about it in a very human type form, it's very natural as to how it should be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you emulate human thought process and human experience. And so you were telling me before, Aaron, that it's got hands on it, and it can do things with this clamp thing.
Yeah.
What are the hands like, and what can it do?
No, it's a hand.
Hand.
I guess it's so our approach, it's a little, typically when you think of an AUV, autonomous underwater vehicle, it is like what you mentioned, like a torpedo, because its function is mostly to kind of scan an area or collect data, things like that. But our vehicle is shaped more like a SUV because it has 8 thrusters instead of just 1. And it needs 8 thrusters so it can kind of do station keeping or hovering. Maybe you mentioned that. Hovering, so it can stay in one place. And then we attach a robotic manipulator to it. So like a human arm with 7 joints, or we call it 7 degrees of freedom. And that arm is also autonomous, so it can do things on its own. You don't have to control it kind of with a joystick. You just say, grab that object, and it does it. So we attach this autonomous manipulator onto our autonomous vehicle. So it's kind of like you can say, grab something, but maybe it's out of reach. So the entire vehicle can move. So it has the freedom to grab whatever it wants anywhere in the ocean.
So what kind of mission would you give it? What kind of thing would it? I guess you guys are just testing now. It's not like you're out there looking for mines in the Gulf of Aqaba.
Yeah,
But,
there you go.
but could it do that sort of thing? Could it look for a mine?
Yes, it can.
And it could look for something on the ocean bottom. It
Yes.
can identify it visually or tactically or something.
Tactically.
Tactically.
This project was sponsored by the Office of Naval Research. And obviously they had specific reasons and results that they were looking for. One of the aspects that we were looking at right from the get-go was being able to detect and identify objects. So obviously, let's say unexploded munitions, various types of torpedoes and bombs. You could use any type of sensors to detect these things. Majority of them tend to be metal-based because it's from 50, 60 years ago. But once you detect it, it's kind of useless unless you can classify what these things are. So you have programs that can sit there and look for specifics about a munition. And let's say you wanted to mark it so you knew where it was. One of the things that our vehicle would be able to do, we'd be able to detect it, classify it, and take a little
A felt
flag
pen,
or
a felt
yeah,
pen.
a
Yeah,
felt
make
pen.
an X on it. Yeah.
That's right. There you go. Put a little, pinger on there, so later on, when a manned submersible happens to go down there, you know that there's something down there that you need to avoid, or if it needs to be retrieved, maybe a vehicle that's bigger than ours needs to go down there to actually retrieve it.
What strikes me is you must have generations of these devices behind you. You've worked on them for all these years, and so this must be like the 20th generation or something. If I'm wrong, if it's the 30th generation, you tell me. But you're building on a whole lifetime of R&D in various areas, various instrumentalities around this equipment.
Mm-hmm.
So each one of these things is the product of so much research and development. Yeah?
Generation-wise, we've gone through many different phases. We have 2 or 3 vehicles that we utilize all the time. We have a circular or a spherical shaped AUV that we used to test in the pool, and very similar to what you were describing in 1965 about tracking and following the bottom. This thing would go down and keep a specific distance from the bottom and go all over the place. So if you go into a dive pool, it has a tendency of going up, and then it'll follow that thing up, and it'll always keep that distance. So there's never this problem that it's going to run into, that embankment. Okay, we have that. We also have this vehicle that we're talking about right now, the semi-autonomous underwater vehicle for intervention
What's
mission.
the name? Is it got a name like Oscar or something?
Solve 'em.
What?
Solve 'em.
Solve them?
It stands. It's an acronym for Semi-Autonomous Underwater Vehicle for Intervention Missions.
Maybe sometime you should name it Oscar.
Oh, maybe we can do that. But maybe Felix. But no, this vehicle has gone through, God, I don't know, so many iterations. But the base of the vehicle has pretty much remained the same. Sensors have been changed, power sources have been changed, various components have been changed. Software, many iterations. But the basic aspect has always been the same.
It strikes me that what you guys are doing over time has relevance not only to underwater vehicles, but to any kind of robotic equipment, even on top of the water. And Lord knows there's enough research and development being done. Japan comes to mind because I know they've been doing a lot of this. But is it so that some of your discoveries could be used on other types of robotic equipment?
Oh, yeah.
Have you patented?
We have provisional patents out on several items. The most common link between the underwater environment is space because of the zero gravity and all that aspect. So many of our research will have both dual underwater and space capabilities. In terms of other countries, many countries now are involved in underwater vehicles. Japan is definitely one of them. But I think our vehicle is still one of the elite few that can do what it does.
That's what I was going to ask you. Because you've been putting all this drill down effort in over so many years, you guys have got to be leaders in this area. Here we are in Hawaii, the land of water. The land of water. So my question is, are we the leader? Who's ahead of us, if anybody, on what you're doing?
In terms of what we're doing,
Yeah.
what we would call underwater autonomous manipulation, we are pretty much at the forefront with maybe a couple other schools. But a lot of it comes down to how much support you can get, how much government interaction you can get.
Are you all dual use? Are you all government grants, or do you get money
We're
from?
We're pretty much government grant, but what we visualize and see as dual use is that underwater vehicles that can do this can get like samples for research. We can definitely go out and do treasure hunting. Maybe you go find an area and then you decide you need to dig it up a little bit to see what's down there. That's where the arm comes in.
Yeah.
There are a couple other areas that we've always been thinking about. One is maybe cultivation of things underwater.
Like growing things.
Growing things, yeah.
Oh,
Maybe
that
that's-
opens up all kinds of possibilities, doesn't it?
You know, the ocean covers more space than anything else on Earth, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's the next area that we have to explore into, expanding everything that we need.
So you mentioned about your colleague in Italy
Mhm.
and how he is involved in an experiment right now to try to control solemn,
Solve them. Yeah.
solemn
we'll send it to you.
by way of his iPhone.
Yeah.
So how does that work if you're not actually communicating with solemn?
Do you want to answer that?
I guess we're communicating minimally.
Minimally,
So
got it.
what
You
we
did
want
say that.
we just issue high-level commands, we call it. So like swim there or grab something, not the very fine like spin your thrusters at this speed. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
high-level commands. So because they're such high-level commands, he can do it from like dial-up modem in Italy, from across on the other side
Dial-up
of the
modem in
globe.
Italy.
That's actually what he's doing. He
How
has
many
his,
miles away is Italy now,
well,
really?
Italy is 12 hours away, which
Okay.
means it's on the other side of the planet.
Yes.
He actually has his cell phone hooked up to his laptop, and he's actually, linking in that way.
By the broadband,
Yeah.
okay. That's truly amazing. So he can actually control. There's something so romantic about being, if you're a control freak kind of person, that's really terrific. You can control a device like this or halfway around the world.
Well, one of the things that we were thinking about back in '97 is all the stuff that you see right now in terms of virtual world and virtual war games.
Yeah.
This
And
is,
real war games,
Yes, and
too.
real war games. And this is actually a small fraction of that. We wanted to see how you can interact between one vehicle and another vehicle in virtual space. And now what Giacomo is doing from Italy allows us to see that you can physically have these vehicles running on this virtual space that we look at on a computer screen, and then we can be sitting there actually watching and saying, that's doing what we want it to do.
That's pretty good.
So it's incredible times right now.
You're really at the frontier, Song Choi and Aaron Hanai. You guys are doing great things. You're putting Hawaii on the map, or maybe even under the map.
Well, we're trying to.
So I like to close this by asking you to tell me, both of you, what you would say to the kids out there, because I know your work must be very interesting and appealing to kids everywhere. So let's go you first, Aaron. What do you say to the kids? What should they study? How, should they get involved? What should they do to get involved?
Well, I guess you got to start with the basics, like know your math and science. And I guess that's the push now in Hawaii. We're trying to get kind of the younger generation to get into math and science. And I think that's the key. And once you kind of step over to engineering, you have this sense of satisfaction, because when you go beyond the theory and you start to make something physical, you really have that sense of accomplishment. You can look at it, it's tangible. And I think it's pretty exciting. And we're kind of at that time now in the world where we're getting into robotics and things that it's getting more technological and kind of exciting. So I
Yeah,
think it's a good time to get involved in engineering.
yeah, I want to be a
science
kid
and
again. Yeah. Song Choi, what would you leave those kids with? What's your message to them?
Well, I think what we should mention is that both Aaron, myself, Giacomo, and our other technician, Kaikala, are very heavily involved with the STEM robotics education that's here in Hawaii. And that's really important because we want the students to understand that the basic core subjects, like Aaron said, the math, the science, and we don't want to leave out English, because you have to be able to read and understand what's going on. Once you have those basics, it's all up to your daydreaming or whatever you want to call it, where you can go wherever you want. And the biggest satisfaction is, as Aaron has mentioned, it's about being able to think about something, dream about something, and then actually physically creating it. So you have that innate satisfaction of seeing what you've actually dreamed about.
There's no greater satisfaction,
None at
Sung
all.
Choi. I envy you guys being involved. Sung Choi and Aaron Hanai, thank you so much for coming down to ThinkTech.
Thank you very much, Jay.
Aloha.
Aloha.